We've got lots of people freaking out over the quizzes, understandably, and more importantly, probably freaking out over the drawing stuff. So I wanted to point out real quickly some of potentially useful information within this. Number one, probably the most useful, is that as things come about and I feel like I can provide help, what I'm going to be doing is posting to announcements within our course. So depending on your notification settings, you may not actually get these. So please check the announcements. Within the announcements, I honestly don't know if you get repeated emails. I'm going to attempt to pick a title for it so that you can go back and find it. This is a horrible title in my opinion, but Specs Quizzes, the drawing process. So this is the Smiles thing. So if you wanted practice within Smiles to understand how to use it, that's where we actually have this link at the bottom of this. Okay. And I really kind of want to, number one, point out that you should practice using Smiles before a quiz, but based off of what I've seen students actually submitting, the problem isn't with Smiles. The problem is you don't know how to draw the structures, and that's understandable. So that's where I did a follow-up, okay, based off of initial observations. People don't know how to do it. So you can go through, watch the videos and be like, okay, I get the videos, those are easy. And then you can run one attempt at the quiz. Absolutely, go for it. Test yourself and see what's going on. What you will probably find is the quiz is asking you to apply the content in the video. That's significantly harder. So maybe you're great at that application. Phenomenal, great. You get it and you move on. More than likely, you're not going to be phenomenal. This is where you should be going back and you should be doing homework or finding practice to help you learn how to apply it. Okay, in the application or where to find, SmartWork 5 is going to be a great place to start because it's already part of your homework. The practice exam is a good place as well, and SmartWork 5 being better because it gives you answers. Practice exam sets you kind of up for your paper homework, which makes a lot of sense. And if you let me know you've submitted answers, I can go in and check and verify. And then the internet as a blanket statement, there's lots of practice questions out there, so you can go ahead and use that. And then I'm going to make a separate video. You could go through and use even ChatGPT and have it just produce a problem set. And in fact, I'll show you how I use ChatGPT to pick up kind of the questions. Within this, I was supposed to attach a file. I did not. Followed it up with a file down here. So this is a quick 10 questions that ChatGPT created. The first, I think 10 are actually way too easy, and then the last 5 maybe are appropriate and reasonable for you to go through and use. So within that, where'd it go? This is the practice that I believe I've got posted there. So it came up with a bunch of questions, and one of the big problems behind this that I noticed in using ChatGPT, which again I'll address in a little bit, or in a different video, you're going to get dropped with these formulas, and that can be a little bit challenging to figure out. And I have to code the questions a little bit better into ChatGPT to figure it out. But what you'll end up seeing is ChatGPT is almost undoubtedly going to give you names. You're not officially responsible for names yet, so that can get a bit dodgy to come up with your Lewis structure. What this particular formula should have been would have been CH3CH3. So what I'm telling you need to do before you use Smiles is make sure you know how to draw the structure. That's a horrible arrow, but that's close enough to an arrow, which would then mean I could draw a structure like this, and I could go in and I'd drop in all the hydrogens. This sets me up with that formal structure. So what I would recommend you go through and do is a whole bunch of these so that you get used to that practice and figuring it out. These first kind of 5 to 10 questions, first 4 questions I think are bad because they're giving you the full formula, not the condensed formula, and you really need the condensed formula or the structural formula. This next one, ethanol, acetone is going to be a little bit trickier, but ethanol is a straightforward, simple one to pull off. Acetone's a little bit trickier. Acetic acid is going to be much trickier, but a good one for practice. Benzene's not reasonable for you to figure out. Formaldehyde's a trickier one. Ethylene, trickier one, but you should be able to figure that one out. And then what I ended up asking for is I needed questions with the parentheses, because I think people are struggling with those parentheses. So what I'm going to go through and do is first off, what I'm going to do here is grab this formula and I'm going to tweak it a little bit. And what we want to do is just kind of walk through how you should be doing this. So if a quiz popped up and said you needed to draw the structure for, we'll do CH3 to CH, COO, CH3. So first and foremost, based off of what I'm seeing and hearing as feedback from students, you're trying to go straight into SMILES. SMILES is not where you do your work. You do your work pencil and paper by hand. If you're adept at this, because remember, SMILES is a mastery test, you should be able to draw it by hand swiftly to then be able to copy it into SMILES. Or you're drawing it in your head and then going directly into SMILES. And that becomes kind of the challenge within this, is where are you in that line? I hate to break it to you, you're not good. You shouldn't be good. You haven't practiced this. So do it by hand and slowly work your way out. So how should we do this? Left to right is how you read. The first thing I encounter is parentheses. So what I'm going to start with is I have 2 parentheses. Okay. What are those parentheses connected to? So I'm continuing into my chain. Those parentheses are connected to a carbon. So I'm going to be connected to the carbon, but both parentheses must be connected to that carbon. That carbon is then connected to a hydrogen. And then what I've seen lots of people go through and do is say, well, what's the hydrogen connected to? No, that's not the case. Because hydrogen, based off of lots of Lewis structure practice, can only have one bond, which means that green bond isn't talking about the connection of the hydrogen. It's talking about the remaining octet for your carbon. Okay? So it's a carbon to carbon linkage. Okay. As we continue to move through, we now encounter yet another issue, and we're going to loop colors. I have that carbon connected to an oxygen. Well, it then looks like I'm connected to another oxygen. This comes with practice and recognizing patterns, and we'll address this in a second here. If we then connect out to the carbon, which is then connected to 3 hydrogens, we would note we've got some problems. We could even go through and say, well, if we're looking at neutral structures, and we know it's neutral because there's nothing written in the upper right-hand corner of my formula, okay, everything needs its octet. Okay, everything needs its octet, and it needs to be neutral. Well, if I need an octet, I would need to put more electrons on that green carbon, but that's not neutral anymore, which means there's something wrong with how I've drawn the structure. Okay, this is where practice comes into play and how you would then manipulate and deal with what those formulas mean and how to translate them. Okay, and where our initial error comes in is what's going on with this COO. It's very rare to have an oxygen-oxygen bond. More than likely what's happening, you're not going to like this, but I'm going to draw it this way, is that carbon is connected to that oxygen. Okay, so that satisfies some of it, but then my red oxygen is missing its octet, and the carbon is missing its octet still, double bond. Okay, and that's how that formula builds out. How would I know that? That comes with practice. Okay, that's that building process of getting used to how many bonds should each individual, and I didn't open it, but there's a slide of the common bonding patterns in organic chemistry. You're doing Lewis practice so that you know what those common bonding patterns are. The opposite way of doing this is memorizing the common bonding patterns so that you don't have to do as much practice. You then have to apply that memorization, and that's where things can get dodgy. You'll note I'm not done officially because I have to go back to my parentheses. Well, within those parentheses, I had a CH3. I can now erase my parentheses, and of course I have text in behind it because that makes it look ugly. And as we know, everything I do looks ugly. So there we go. We'd have that CH3, and then I would have to repeat it on the other end. And I would have that CH3. Now I could go in and plug it into Smiles. I'm 10 minutes into this video, and you'd be like, well, what the hell? How could I possibly do all that? Well, you would do all that because you're used to those patterns, okay? And that becomes part of this. You never have infinite time. You just don't. So you have to have this process where you're used to how to function and move through things so that you can be successful in the Smiles generator and under the time crunch of an exam. Okay, so now how would I go through and draw this into Smiles? How do I want to do this? I'm just going to have to memorize it because I can't draw the structure up there at the same time. So if you want to actually see this structure later on, draw it real quickly now because I'm about to delete it. Deleted. Now how do I deal with drawing it into Smiles? Smiles should look very similar to SmartWork. There's a bunch of stuff out here that we quite frankly don't care about, so don't worry about it. So what we're looking at is we want bonds. So there's a bond. There's a bond. That's a CH3. That's a CH3. How do I know that? Those are the abbreviations of OChem. That's part of doing some of those OChem structures. That goes to a CH. I know it has an H bonded to it. Okay, which then goes to a carbon. That carbon, according to my rules, okay, so sometimes we find mistakes, needed to be double bonded. Okay, so I can't make the double bond on top of a bond, so I'm going to have to select the double bond. And I need that to go to an oxygen. So I can select my oxygen, oxygen. That says an OH. I don't want an OH, and as soon as I make that other bond, it's going to delete the H. And I wanted a carbon out there, that's my CH3. Wow, did I draw that fast? I think that's what we had up. I'm not positive, but I think that's what we had up. Do I have to draw all the hydrogens? No. Okay, and part of practicing this might help you to see that we don't need to draw all those hydrogens, because what happens if I put those out as hydrogens? Ooh, interesting. I'm not even sure I can draw hydrogens. I can. This part you can't see, but what I'm doing is hovering over it until I get the blocks or the box around that atom, and then I just type the letter H and it drops in a hydrogen. Okay. Do I need those hydrogens? Well, look at this code. So you can do generate INCHI, which I thought you needed to do to get the Smiles code. Okay, but it'll do whatever it wants to do whenever you click that generate INCHI. And then what I'm talking about for the sake of our quizzes is the Smiles code. So once you've finished your drawing, what you would do is then select that text and insert it into the quiz, copy paste into the quiz. And if you look at that text, there's no explicit hydrogens. Why? Hydrogens are implied in OChem, so you don't need to draw them. How would you know that prior to doing the quiz? You would play with the software and figure out what it can do. Okay, so that's one of the reasons why I'm creating this video, which is already longer than I wanted it to be, but it's to give you kind of that experience and heads up behind how to use it, and so you're aware of those systems. You have other buttons and features that you can play with. I'll leave that up to you to decide if you want to play with them or not. You may need to, depending on the system. Erasing, just because erasing might be nice. This white box looks really suspicious. Actually, I'm going to have... Oh, yeah, that made everything red. Let's not do that. If you want to erase, hover over whatever you want to erase, and let's probably delete. Ta-da! There we go. We got it. Okay, so that's how we'll go through and delete. Notice the Smiles code is not changing for any of those hydrogens. With that, I'm going to say I talked too much, and I'm done with this video. If you've got questions, feel free to send me an email, something like that, post an announcement, that kind of deal, or reply to announcements. Thanks.